Yeah.
Yeah, don't
So,
even tell me when you start recording.
okay, yeah, no, I have no intention to. But anyway, how about those stimulus checks? 600 $600.
What are you going to spend your $600 on?
I don't know. I think I was gonna put it in with the 500 million going to Israel and buy myself a Iron Dome for my house,
Buy my,
personal Iron Dome.
buy myself an Israeli girlfriend.
Yeah, I don't know how that's gonna go for you though.
I well, unfortunately, they just raised the price of every gun in the country to $601.
Yeah,
So I don't know what I'm going to do now.
maybe I'll buy a racehorse.
Oh,
That's what
that's
I'll
right.
do.
You don't have to pay taxes on that anymore or something.
Yeah, I'll buy a racehorse and then I won't have to pay taxes anymore.
Yeah, that's something that like is pissing me off because all the people that like when you point out like why did a bill that's supposed to be about COVID get all this extra stuff added to it? Like DC media types are like, well, if you knew anything about Congress, you would know that that's normal and that's part of the process. I'm like, okay, yeah, it. I know that, and it sucks, and I reserve my right to be angry about it.
Yeah, I mean, there are very few things that Herman Cain was right about. One of them is that there should be no bills that are longer than 3 pages. Nobody likes to read. It should be basically a bulleted list. I don't have the attention span for 5,900 pages of stimulus bill, and I don't know the decorum around selecting the next Dalai Lama. But
What's your take on the stimulus? What do you think? Is it good?
well, I'm not getting any, which is bad. You're not either.
No.
Um, adult dependents are having a great time out here.
And we
But
pay taxes. I had a job. I still do, kind of technically.
oh, absolutely, yeah, I have paid a lot in taxes and Social Security. It's a bad time. But yeah, I think that I side with just about everyone except for Congress on this issue where $600 is not enough. Why? You got to actually pay people if you want them to stay home and not die or starve. You have to pay them.
And 1,200 wasn't enough the first time either.
1,200 alone, no. If it was a recurring one, I might have a different idea of 1,200, but no, as a single payment that goes out once, 1,200 is not enough. Should have been monthly.
It's crazy that the vice president elect of the United States, Kamala Harris, when she was a senator, she was fighting for $2,000 a month people would get. And that plan just evaporated. Like even Bernie Sanders, the champion of literally socialism, quote unquote, in this country, saying like he this time around he was capitulated to $1,200. He was fighting for that. That's become the left position now. Is like 12, not like literally, obviously, but like in the terms of like the electoral left, 1,200 is what they were advocating for.
Yeah, and that's the max. From here on out, that's going to be seen as the maximum amount of money that we're willing to spend on stimulus.
Isn't that weird? That I just realized like this, like naturally, I didn't put it in my notes or anything. I took notes for this episode. This is the first time I've ever done that. I was excited for this episode. Um, but I didn't, that like went right over my head. The fact that, now I want to talk about this. The fact that $1,200 like went from like being not enough the first time to now like the max. Like how is that? That's insane. That like that just like that is now the limits of what we can imagine our government doing for us at this time. Like that people would be excited for $1,200 this time, even though correctly understanding that the government can afford to send a great deal to people, and they're just choosing not to. That's is that manufacturing consent? Like
I,
just
yeah, I don't know, but I think that's going to be something we keep seeing with like the Democratic Party, DSA, and all that moving through the episode is setting arbitrary boundaries. I think that leads us perfectly into our discussion. So roll scene.
Yeah, here we go. But I mean, you're familiar that, like, I know as an econ guy, you're familiar with that, with the Ben Bernanke interview where he admitted money was fake, right?
Yeah, the one where they ask him, what did they say? They're talking about like what he does for stimulus, and he just says, "Oh, we moved the decimal place."
Like he
And
admitted, we
he
just
just types some numbers into a computer.
Yes, like he admitted, like when they're bailing out the banks, they just punch in zeros until like they get a number that like they want, and they can't do this for the American people. That's crazy, right?
Yeah,
Like
no. How could we
they
do that?
admitted it. Like this, the Ben Bernanke like just came right out and said it, and said that he eventually admitted that it was fake, that the debt, therefore, like debt is fake, inflation is fake. Like all this is made up. It's just arbitrary. You just type in zeros and you're like, okay, this is the amount of money you have.
I mean, yeah, that's the whole thing that undergirds the entire field of economics is you do all these things, you learn all these concepts, and they're all shattered by the simple question of like, why? Why does it work like that? Like, are these essential, fundamental, immutable laws of nature? No, it's just kind of how things are. More often than not, I mean, economics is a great example of the idea of like intersubjectivity, how things are only this way because we've all agreed that they're this way and they will thus continue to be that way. But yeah, no, it's insane, especially that interview. It makes me laugh every time.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. All right. Without further ado, I came up with the topic idea for this week. My father asked me, he's like, "Are you doing like a light episode? Because it's a few days until Christmas. Are you gonna do like a holiday themed, like goofy?" I'm like, no, because I got canceled on Twitter for calling out Finland for their participation in the Holocaust.
Yep.
I pointed out that the Finns were Nazis during World War II, or allied with,
Mm-hmm.
and I did this to a bunch of fans of Vaush, the Twitch streamer who um, I bet a lot of people that listen to this podcast don't even know who he is, and that's just great. I wanted to make this a Vaush themed episode, but now I don't. I don't think it's worth it to pay him any lip service. I think he's clearly like, I don't know if he's an idiot or if he's just a genuine like bad person. But everybody's pointed out how he's very obviously like racist and transphobic, and says things like defends. He's like, all right, and even if he wasn't all of these things, he would still be really annoying, because I think Twitch streamers are by definition very annoying, bad people, and I don't like debate bro culture. Like, I'm going to have you on the Twitch stream so I can debate you. I think Ben Shapiro has done enough. Like, Ben Shapiro and his like debate bro culture has gotten a lot of people who otherwise could potentially agree with him to like hate his guts. And if you remember when the alt-right was first getting started in like 2016, Milo Yiannopoulos and all those people like launched their careers by like making fun of Ben Shapiro from a conservative standpoint. Like, look at this short nerd. And like their fans ate it up at the time and realized, yeah, Ben Shapiro kind of sucks and is like annoying. And even if I agree with him, I find him very unappealing. And that's sort of like what Vaush has become for the left.
Yeah, and I'm going to be upfront about it. I have no idea who Vaush is. This is the first time I've heard of them is this week. But no, I completely agree. I think the confrontational culture that has come with like modern online politics, especially with again like those Ben Shapiro types, same with like Charlie Kirk and those people that their response to any disagreement is debate me. You disagree with someone, you just press reply, debate me. Any literally anything happens, you just respond, debate me, and then they don't debate you, and then you call them a coward and you win by default. I think that's dumb. It's disingenuous. It's just a pain. I don't like debating. Debating is awful. I'm not particularly articulate off the cuff in a very confrontational situation like that. I prefer to monologue. It's better this way.
Yeah, and I'm pretty removed from like this discourse, but like what it seemed, I started paying attention to it because the DSA got involved, because there's this, I guess, Vouch adjacent um, Twitch streamer named Destiny, who wanted to like organize with the DSA of some city. I don't know. It wasn't Philly, and we're going to talk a lot about Philly DSA later, but it was some random city said like no because you say like the N word on your stream, and they called him a Nazi, which obviously this guy is like not a Nazi. He's just an annoying racist dumbass, and it's, you know, it's wrong to call him a Nazi, but it's also wrong to like want him in an organization that's supposed to be doing socialism. And so I just saw like, and replies were like flooded with like these people that call themselves Vaushites, who are like, they have anime profile pictures, they like say like racial slur, like the what people project onto Chapo Trap House and the other podcast that I'm not going to say its name because it's very inappropriate, but what people project onto them of like this like dirtbag, like offensive leftist that like believes in Medicare for all, but also wants to believe in saying the N word. That's what these people actually are. They're like racist people who support Medicare for all and think because they like agree with socialists on some issues that makes them socialist. But they also are like very fervent to like Democrats. They're like, you have to vote for Joe Biden. If you didn't vote for Joe Biden, then like you suck and you're not a real socialist. And even though I was a Nazi 2 weeks ago, I am now defining what a socialist is, because a lot of them are like reformed Nazis, allegedly.
Yeah.
And that's what the appeal of this Vouch is supposed to be, is that he's supposed to steer white men from being radicalized to the right and steer them to being radicalized to the left.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's been pretty common with a lot of content left adjacent content creators, is sort of like steering these people that would turn alt-right, alt-light towards more constructive paths of sort of like socialism, social democracy, communism, anarchism, whatever it may be. But no, I think that your case, or like bringing up the case of like Chapo Trap House and like the dirtbag left, is a very good way to put it, and how a lot of these people are really the dirtbag left, how they are sort of told like, oh no, you can be part of this more constructive project without giving up your bad racist, sexist views. And so they sort of join this movement, but rather than necessarily adopt the more egalitarian, forward thinking ideology, they basically remain with the same ideology. They just feel legitimized by being part of a more upstanding movement.
Yeah. Like, and I think like Chapo Trap House is like nurtured a fan base that is not, you know, racist or any of these things, but Vouch has, and it's like you said, like they haven't actually done anything to like get rid of their bad views. And I think, you know, like I, you know, have made a lot of criticisms of identity politics, and I'll continue to. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't think, you know, there's a difference. But like, I just don't think we should, like, you need to break bread with like racists and welcome them into your folds. And, you know, like anti-LGBT people, like that's not good. That's not, you don't want them in your movement, even if your movement is like small. Like there needs to be some sort of like, and that's why I want to bring up this whole PSL thing. Because a PSL guy, a Philly PSL guy, made big head waves on Twitter because he said that the central committee of the PSL wanted to meet with him to complain to him about his tweets, which is totally cringe, right? But at the same time, like people have told me when I talk about the PSL, because I've like, you know, interacted with them in the past and have nothing but really positive things to say. They've told me they're brainwashed. And I'm like, they're not brainwashed. They just have an actual ideology. And like, that's so off putting for so many leftists, you know, people who are into leftist organizing, like the whole idea of having like a strict ideology that you adhere to and, you know, believe in. And you make sure people are advocating for if they want to join is so foreign to them. And obviously, micromanaging people's tweets is not cool. It's kind of nerdy and cringe and embarrassing. But at the same time, if you're like fighting for something that's serious like this, you should have like strict conformity about what you advocate for and how you behave online, where you're going to have, you know, thousands of people seeing it. You know, it's like your parents told you not to post racial slurs on Twitter for a reason. You know, it's really the same thing, in my opinion.
For those of us less familiar, you want to explain who the PSL are?
Oh yeah, sorry. Party for Socialism and Liberation. They're like, I don't know if raw numbers proves this, but like the Party for Socialism and Liberation, they're pretty much like, I would say at this point, the second biggest left-wing party in America right now, and the DSA is the biggest. And we'll let it flow more naturally, but Philly DSA, we also like have to talk about them too, because something pretty big went on there a few days ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the difficult thing with sort of defining and looking at these parties is there's like membership, and they certainly are active, but they're not necessarily represented in government the way other parties would be. So it's very hard to get an idea of like their size and their influence, especially since they're very much regional and based in like various local communities.
Yeah. And you know, people who are in the DSA are, you know, like very vocally anti-PSL, but unlike DSA, Philly PSL actually voted yes on mutual aid for the communities in the city, and Philly DSA had a mutual aid vote that that lost. And this is a big reason why I'm not in DSA, because Philly DSA stands out for being terrible and is like nationally famous for being very, very bad. And they have this caucus in power there that essentially blocks organizing and doesn't like doesn't accept things like mutual aid. And that's like a big reason why I'm not in DSA, is because clearly, like, if you're supposed to be a socialist party that can't even support mutual aid, you know, you're not socialist then. That's not like, that's the bare minimum.
Yeah, and I guess that comes with the question of like the DSA is seen as like the preeminent left collective party, whatever, in America. Like, but how far left are they really? Democratic socialism, despite the scary name to most Americans, is maybe not a moderate ideology. If anything, it's a conservative socialist ideology. But as for like what they stand for, it is very much in line with what people consider to be just sort of like decent political principles of taking care of people and not exploiting people, and is not really representative of the revolutionary and radical ideologies that socialism can be.
Yeah, I think that they should honestly stop calling themselves the Democratic Socialists, because Democratic socialism is not, like, Bernie Sanders confused a lot of people by calling himself this. He's not. Hugo Chavez is a Democratic Socialist. Bernie Sanders and the DSA are social democrats who advocate for capitalism with a welfare state. And that's fine if you believe that. If you want to do that, that's okay, but don't call yourself a socialist, because now, thanks to Bernie Sanders, everybody has accepted that socialism means when the government does stuff, and that's not at all what it is. And Philly DSA wants to, they tweeted, we're going to pay for all these things by taxing the rich and ending wars in the Middle East. I'm like, this is not socialism. That is a perfectly acceptable viewpoint to have in the Democratic Party. Like
Yeah,
these, yeah, they're liberals. Like that's
yeah, no, that's the like, again, we were talking about it earlier, but when we set these sort of ideological barriers, and I think one of those barriers in America is socialism, is you can't really go that far left. You can't be a real socialist. So the Socialist Party we do have is inherently liberal. It's farther left than any of the parties we have, but it still has these like entrenched liberal values, like market-based sort of welfare state, as you were saying, where it is sort of designed to operate within this specific political and economic system that already exists.
yeah, and it's like confining itself to these debates, like the thing we talked about last week, the Jimmy Dore versus AOC Nancy Pelosi vote. Like, should AOC vote for Nancy Pelosi? First of all, I don't even know if AOC has ever even called herself a socialist. And if she hasn't, I think that should be a genuine problem that we who identify as socialists should have. I think it's time, if she doesn't call herself one, to stop advocating for her and stop, going through these great lengths to defend her. And like, no, here's why her vote for Nancy Pelosi is actually a good thing. No socialist should vote for Nancy Pelosi for anything. They shouldn't vote for her for dog catcher. And and AOC has been serving this function now where if you see on today, she pinned the whole blame for the bad stimulus checks on the GOP. And that's just not true. Part of it is Nancy Pelosi's fault. Nancy Pelosi really let this one go. She chose to wait, and she forced to wait till after the election, which I understand that's doing politics. Like you're kidding yourself if you don't think the Republicans would have done the same exact thing. But it costs the Democrats a lot at the negotiating table, and we're getting a much worse deal now because of it. And Nancy Pelosi has caused a lot of the problems that came with this negotiation. So AOC is serving as like a mouthpiece for the Democratic Party at this point by pinning the blame solely on the GOP, and that's essentially what the DSA is starting to do too. Like, they refused to endorse Howie Hawkins, which is insane because he was calling himself a socialist. No, 2 chapters endorsed him and were punished for it by National, which is insane because you have an actual eco-socialist running for president and you can't even rally behind him because you know that you want most of your members to vote for Joe Biden, which is also insane because he's very explicitly said that he is an anti-socialist and he is bragged about defeating the socialist wing of the party and is like, firmly anti-socialist, anti-communist, anti-whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the stimulus talks and like where that ended up is a great point of like who we lay the blame on. Like for the first half of negotiations, I would say yes, the burden did fall on Mitch McConnell and his refusal to pass these $2-3 trillion stimulus packages. He wouldn't go above 500 billion, but then we reached the point where the ball is in Nancy Pelosi's court, and what do we end up? We end up with the $600 and then $500 million to Israel, $500 million to other countries. It becomes this omnibus deal that has so much garbage in it. Like, it's the laundry list of every lobbying firm in Washington. It's nonsense, and you can have $600 if you are not a dependent and you make under $100,000 a year. It's something, but it's not much. And I think that's consistently what we're seeing, and that sort of like reluctance or even like the barrier to criticizing the Democrats because they are the leftmost party in the United States is sort of a barrier to actually moving forward, the fact that we can't criticize them. And I think that AOC, whether or not she's affiliated with DSA and to some degree is still a Democrat. Bernie didn't necessarily have that because he is an independent and he runs independent, but he still caucuses with the Democrats. There is no socialist caucus. There's no independent left-wing caucus. We have the squad, but they're still Democrats. They're still part of this fundamentally liberal party.
And like people keep thinking one of them is going to run for president and save us all. Um, like, do you really? They're so young, all of them. Do you really think they're going to stay in Washington for all these years and like choose you over everything the Democratic Party will offer them? To like, don't you think they are desperate to like fully turn AOC into their creature because she'll be so useful for them? Like they could mold her into the next Obama if they really wanted to. And I don't think we have any reason yet to assume that she won't. That's not something she'll pursue. I'm not saying that to be like mean to her as an individual. I'm just saying I think any individual would be insane not to take their offer. And like that sort of gets into another problem I have with the DSA and with social democracy. Social democracy, as I defined, is capitalism with a welfare state. The problem is like there are a lot of people who are claiming to be socialists right now who think that everything. Well, Bernie Sanders lost, so now we have to put all of our hopes into AOC. That's insane. That is psycho. That's really ridiculous to put all of your hopes in individuals and believing that if individual X is in charge, problem Y will be solved. What they fail to understand is that like the system we live under, we can't pay people to stay home. Like we do not have the infrastructure for that, A, and B, I think Rand Paul said it best. He said on the Senate floor, if we start paying people $600, what's to stop us from paying them $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever? And he asked he said the quiet part out loud because they cannot do that. They can't, and they also can't give us even if they do pass Medicare for all or something, it wouldn't be enough because these issues that are presented, more so the direct payments to individual paying people to stay home, these problems are embedded into the system of capitalism to keep it running. I think a perfect example is the federal jobs guarantee. That was a policy championed by FDR that after he got elected to his third term, whatever, he threw it out the window. And now that's sort of making a comeback. I think Bernie talked about it. He didn't make it part of his platform, but he talked about it. And there's a lot of socialists talking about that being a cause they fight for. Capitalism needs a reserve of unemployed people. Like it needs that to be part of the system to function. That's why FDR scrapped it, or people made him scrap it. I don't know which, but a federal jobs guarantee could never work or be passed because they need a constant reserve of unemployed to justify paying people starvation wages. And if you start talking about things like UBI, like giving people $2,000 a month to stay home, eventually they're going to ask themselves, well, why the F am I waitressing? Why am I working at McDonald's or being an Uber driver? And then you won't have those anymore. And this system needs them. It needs people to be the poorest of the poor. That's how it functions. And that is the root problem I have with social democracy, is that it thinks you can break it down to individuals and separate issues. They don't understand that there's a larger system that works here, that if you want to fix it, the whole system needs to come tumbling down.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that brings it back to the essential point of Marxism and the point that he always made in identifying this base and superstructure. Social democracy is this sort of influence and changing of the superstructure, and perhaps we get new institutions, we get new systems, and you know what, maybe we do get a better quality of life, but we're still not addressing that fundamental issue, or the fundamental problem that comes with the conditions created under capitalism, and those will still pervade whatever benefits or successes that social democracy provides, because we are still within that fundamental system of labor exploitation, class division.
Whenever I talk about these problems to my friends, they understand, but also get mad at me and sort of like tune me out because they think like they like know me and they know, oh, so you're just going to start advocating for, you're just saying all these things as a justification for your own ideology to justify for like wanting Stalinism or whatever. And I'm like, no, that's not at all what I'm saying. I'm not, I, even as I speak right now, I'm not necessarily coming out with an idea of what to advocate for. I'm just saying that like, if you are someone, this is for you. If you're someone who knows you're to the left of the Democratic Party, you know you're to the left of Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi. And if you're not, I don't want you to listen to this show because I'm kidding. But if you are aware of that, then you need to realize that DSA and this Bernie Sanders style presidency really isn't it, Chief. Like it's not. It's clearly like. Don't get me wrong. I'll vote for um, anybody who runs on Bernie's platform in the future. Like if you adopt that, if you adopt his platform, add more things to it, uh, you got my vote in a Democratic primary. Sure, whatever. But like as an ends all be all, we can't be advocating for it. We can't kid ourselves into thinking even if Bernie got elected, what then? We have no way of guaranteeing that he would be able to cajole the Democrats in Congress to actually put forward any legislation. I mean, it was Democrats that killed the public option in Obamacare. So clearly they won't be, even if they get elected, if they got elected with majorities in the Senate and in the House with under a Bernie Sanders presidency, we have no guarantee that we would have got what we wanted or like what we needed really. Um, there's no evidence to believe that he would fix it if he got elected. And I still voted for him. I still advocated for him. I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat. But it made me keenly aware that System X will not be fixed by individual Y. And you're kidding. You can't lie yourself into believing that.
I mean, the stakes are all incredibly short term. This isn't like the US will uplift all of its citizens over 10 years, over 20 years. It's 2-year, 4-year, 6-year cycles. That's it. That's as far as you're looking. You're not looking at like the long-term potential of like uplifting all the people of the United States under this sort of electoral system. I mean, the only federal group that does that is like the Federal Reserve. And if we want to talk about entrenched capitalist institutions, they're probably number one. But as far as like, especially the stimulus is a great idea or a great example of this sort of issue where like $1,200 now, $600 now. That's it. That's all you get. It's for now. What are we going to do into the future to prevent this from happening? What are the structural institutional changes that we are doing or we are going to undertake to, one, prevent this from happening again, and two, actually fix it before 300,000 people die and 14 million people lose healthcare? There isn't that plan. That plan doesn't exist. We pass budgets, and instead of investing in America, we put our money into foreign countries and into our military and all that sort of thing, because that's the structures that exist and that we have to keep like upgrading and sort of like continuing to build on. And that's fundamentally part of the problem.
Yeah, and like you're right. We need to build. We need to attack the institutions at their root because the institutions that exist are serving their function. That's like the difference, I think, between Warren and Sanders in the primary. Warren was running on this is broken and I'm going to fix it. Bernie was like, no, this is working exactly as it's meant to. That's why we need to change the whole thing. And he was totally right. I just don't think that the DSA are the people to do that because they are also not engaging in this kind of systems thinking needed. They, because I mean, what did you do in the election? You voted for Joe Biden because you wanted to get rid of Donald Trump. And we did it, and he was the most voted for person in history. So he was going to win anyway without you voting for him. Okay, great. Whatever. It doesn't matter. It's over now. What's done is done. But do you want to keep voting for Joe Biden's for the rest of your life? Like, again, if you agree with Joe Biden on the fundamental issues, when he says things like, the American people don't want a handout, I'm not going to give them a handout. That's insane. That sucks. That's bad. That's ridiculous. If you're unemployed and you're starving, you should have a handout. We can't be. Joe Biden is terrible, but again, it's like you said last week. What are you going to do? Vote for a Republican? No, of course not. But the limiting yourselves to these choices of Joe Biden or Donald Trump, that's a false choice. That does not really exist. Those are not your two only options. You need to understand that. You need to learn that and realize, no, I do not have to choose between the blue rapist or the red rapist this year. There are a bunch of different things, and you need to read to learn to understand what these terms are. There's long reading lists that you should get into to start looking for alternatives. And you're not going to find the alternative in these pages, but you're going to learn the language to understand why things are the way they are and why you can't vote for AOC in 2032 or whenever, and she'll get elected and wave a magic wand, and suddenly Raytheon will be run by really nice people. You need that's why I always advocate for reading Marx and Lenin. I think you might not find the solution within the pages of Lenin because he was writing in the 1900s, and we're in 2020 now. But you will learn the language necessary to attack these issues head on and start to develop an understanding of the system as a whole. And you can only come to better conclusions when you do the reading and you learn the language, and that's something you need to embrace.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really great point to bring up, is that we both have a lot of very similar systemic critiques. We have pretty different conclusions. I think we're not entirely on board with the same solutions to these problems, but engaging in that sort of broader thinking and actually identifying what the issues are in this system is incredibly important. And I think a lot of people have an idea of what on the surface is the problem. They just have to be pushed to dig a little deeper, because if you look at the things you see that are wrong with America, odds are once you start digging, there will be connections, and they will all come from the same origins.
Right. And the problem is we're not at the point where we can start thinking of an alternative system, I think, in my opinion. We're not at the point where we can start, yes, I want to do Soviet communism again. Even if that is what we need to do, we don't know that yet. And that's why, whenever people you saw that tweet, I'm sure, what will your job be in the leftist commune?
Yep.
Okay, first of all, shut up. Second of all, we don't need to ask that question yet, do we? Because there's no leftist commune being built. My goal, I've accepted that there's not going to be anything good happening in my lifetime, more or less. I want to spend my lifetime getting to the point where those questions actually do start to matter. When I'm on my deathbed, I'm okay, guys, now we can decide what the jobs are going to be on the leftist commune. What do you want your job to be in the leftist commune, though, Jack?
I don't know. I'd probably go live in the woods as a hermit, do subsistence farming.
So you leave, you just immediately move out of the commune?
Yeah.
Well, I would be.
I mean, if we I was gonna say, if we know anything about utopian socialism, establishing these communes where everyone does their fair share of work, it doesn't work. You can't really organize an isolated society that way. You have to actually build social structures. You can't just be oh, I'm going to live on the anarchist commune. Everyone's going to do their part. We're going to farm together and live together, and it's going to be great. Doesn't work. Never has. Probably never will. Everyone either starves to death or hates each other by the end.
What about Chaz?
Yeah, because Chaz is an example of a successful leftist commune. The anarchists really did a great job with that. No, I think Chaz Chaz is a demonstration of the fundamental failures of like sort of anarchist and left organization in America. How they have these like brilliant ideas like, oh, we'll cordon off this section of the city and this will be our area, until it comes to the issues of, oh, how do we run this? How do we live here? People bring us food, people bring us water. Oh, our de facto police officers just killed someone. What do we do now? They It doesn't exist outside of like these social structures that we've been criticizing this whole time. They think they're separate from these like systemic social issues, and they think that by like saying this is our city, they've sort of escaped like these hegemonic cultural and social tendencies, but they haven't. They engage in a lot of the same social hierarchy, and when they don't, it ends up being ineffectual and kind of falling apart, and they have to revert to essentially the way things are in America. And that's why building a commune like Chaz in the middle of, was it Seattle? Is that where it
Yeah.
was? Yeah, in the middle of Seattle, that's not going to work. You can't, because it's not self-sufficient. It's not separate from anything really. It's just, hey, the police won't come in here anymore. Let's just be really cool until you kill someone, until you murder someone.
Until you shoot a black teenager, which is what
Exactly.
started the protest that made Chaz possible.
Yeah. So
It's
like, good effort, guys, but no, a bad
yeah.
idea.
Let me make it clear. If you take any of the advice that I gave out for free on this episode, and you go and actually do the readings, and you come out of it like, oh, I'm an anarchist now. I think anarchism is a good. Go back to the drawing board. Come reach out to me. If you've made the transition from social democrat to anarchist, that means that you did the homework. You just failed the test, and it's okay. There you can do a lot of remakes. We're going to help you. If you get to that stage on your own, then you've proven that you're like worthy. I have nothing against anarchists. They are our little silly brothers and sisters, and we're going to help them, But social democrats are not. They are wreckers. And I kind of want to talk about the DSA specifically because I wrote this down in my notes, and I think it might be funny. It sort of seems like from what I've seen, like DSA and DSA adjacent people, like again, I want to stop saying this guy's name. This will be the last episode we ever mention his name, but just for a frame of reference, like Vouch like people, sort of like a big faction of the DSA and like people that think the DSA is the end all be all. The left is like these people who are very against IDPOL, very vocally hating IDPOL, and want to return to like 1950s style, like American trade unionism, and think that was the best society could be, where like you have cigar chomping white dudes like organizing a strike, and fantasies of like delusions of grandeur about the white working class, and thinking like, oh, we can just do the 1950s without segregation, and that's all we need to
Did
do.
you watch Mank recently? Because I got very strong Mank vibes from that speech.
What do you mean? Did I sound like Mank? Or like I did watch Mank? I thought I didn't like Mank. It just made me want to watch Citizen Kane, which I did, and I did like Citizen Kane.
No, that's exactly the kind of politics it's sort of advocating for, like idealizing, is this whole like, hey, we're a bunch of like white dudes in the turn of the century, and we're gonna make movies. We're all really smart. We're really clever. Everyone knows we're clever boys, and they love and appreciate us, and we're gonna do socialism.
Oh yeah, yes. Mank. I did pick up on the socialist, but like Mank, was a socialist, I guess, and like
Yeah, he wasn't in real life, but he was in the movie.
Oh, really? I didn't know anything about like I really thought Orson Welles did it all by himself. I guess like the capitalist propaganda was like about Orson Welles as a caricature and Citizen Kane, because that really is like they always talk about how like he did it all himself at the age of 24, and that is probably
Mhm.
part of ideology, like capitalist individualism. Like look at like I don't Orson Welles was probably not that bad of a guy, but the framing of him as this caricature makes him almost like an Ayn Randian type protagonist.
Oh, absolutely. But as you were saying about like the 50s style unionism and whatnot, like, yeah, people see that. People see this sort of coming out of World War II as the model for what American socialism should be with like these New Deal policies. But that doesn't exist. That never really existed. It's not, you can't like desegregate that period of time because that's like fundamentally linked. And that's the whole problem I find with a lot of this sort of like anti-idpol like movement. And I think that it's easy to fall into the trap of like relying too much on identity. But more often than not, even if you are, say, a class reductionist, all of these sort of like identity markers are still manifestations of class. So you should be paying attention to it. These should be things that you care about. And that's why I
Absolutely.
think that like ignoring issues of race and gender and all of these other ones that seem like entrenched in our society and like sort of have perpetuated through capitalism, ignoring these issues to focus exclusively on class is absurd when these issues are manifestations of class.
Yes, yes. If you're not trying to build a socialism that addresses like anti-racism in the United States, you're insane. You know, like that is really bad. And yes, you're right. There is a growing call for I don't even know if it's from Bauschites, but it's more from like you know, people who are on r slash stupid idpol are like, yes, we just need to do the 1950s without segregation, and they don't understand that that is impossible. That labor relations weren't even that good in like the 1950s, like really. Um, but that's one sort of like faction of this emerging uh, DSA, and the other is rad libs, radical liberals who are just using this to polish their resumes to get nice DNC jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And both of these factions are so you should again, this is a false choice. You don't have to choose between the two of these things because both of these things are bad, and we can accept that and move on and not choose the lesser of the two evils, whatever you think that might be. It's another false choice. Like, do you really want to work with either of those groups of people? They're both equally harmful, I think. They're not going to, like why are we letting ourselves be limited to this? To you're either a Democrat or you're a DSA, and if you're DSA, you're one of the two groups I just mentioned. That's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that that's sort of like the fundamental issue is like, I guess when you think about it, it'd be really easy to be a conservative because despite whatever differences you see in like the conservative movement, there isn't the same kind of factionalism. You have like the alt-right maybe and like the Tea Party and the Republican Party. That's not necessarily analogous to this sort of factionalism we see on the left. And I think this sort of is a problem, is this sort of how we divide and view one another, because socialism, social democracy, and even like liberalism to some degree is built on like collective movement or like sort of consolidating a group ideology and like moving upon it. And yet we are so plagued by factionalism. I mean, I was talking with my sister the other day, and she asked me a really good question of like why people are so defensive over the title socialist. Like, why is it that someone can say, "Oh, I'm a socialist," and you'll have like three people at your throat being like, "No, you're not. You're not really a socialist. Like, how could you call yourself a socialist? You don't actually believe in socialism." When so much of it is actually based on like coalition building. I mean, if we look at unionism as like the basis for most socialist movements, why would you deny people entrance to the union? I mean, I'd understand denying people entrance to your party, but like if they want to join you in solidarity, that's more power to you. So why not? So I'm wondering your thoughts on this sort of issue of like labels and factionalism and how this sort of like shattered and scattered left can be effective and how it falls short.
Yeah, yeah. And to just address that, because it seems like I might be advocating for factionalism. What I'm really saying is like what we talked about when friend of the show Doug League was on. Like we don't care if you're like a Trotskyist or a Maoist or a syndicalist, because at this point that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're, whatever you want to label yourself as. But what does matter to me is that there are a bunch of people who are being, whether they are aware of it or not, harmful. And those, anti-id pollers who, conflate, don't get me wrong, saying things like, oh, well, the CEO of Raytheon is a black woman, so all our problems are solved. That's stupid. I want to fight against that. If that's your id poll, then I'm against it. But this whole thing, we're like, oh, well, we just need to appeal to only white working class people and we'll build a great movement that will fix everything. Like, no, that's also terrible. And yes, I think if you want to build an actual socialist movement that can achieve things for people, I think you need to get rid of people who are, again, unwittingly or knowingly wrecking it. And I think that's kind of what the DSA is doing. I mean, certainly in Philly, if they're opposing mutual aid and stopping, a mutual aid vote in the largest socialist party in the entire United States, and they're not doing mutual aid, then they're harmful. They're harmful for the movement. And I think if you're a member, it's time to look into resigning and joining a party or an organization that's doing some more meaningful work, and not just being an errand boy for the Democratic Party and convincing, leftists to vote for Joe Biden. Because at the end of the day, that's all you're really doing. You look at how Bernie's campaign turned out. And we didn't even get into how social democracy is linked with fascism. We didn't even touch that. Folks, Bernie voted for the bombing of Yugoslavia. Never forget that. The self-avowed socialist voted, hell yeah, to bomb a socialist nation. Let's not, but again, we're not going to get into that. I don't want to start. I will say this. You and I have talked about this before. I am becoming increasingly more and more into like reading Settlers, and like I'm getting danger close here. And like we're not going to touch on, any of that, I think, in this episode, but I'm warning you guys ahead of time. It's only going to get more insane from here. I'm only going to get more psycho from here.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem that we should just add to all of this is the fact that like everyone on the left is too online. We spend too much time on Twitter. Twitter is everyone's worst side. No wonder we all hate each other if our only interactions are over Twitter, especially now that like there's no more communal gatherings or talking to people in person. So my big recommendation to anyone out there is read a book. Don't log on to Twitter, just read a book. Preferably something like Capital. You'll learn a lot from it.
Fate and Revolution.
Yeah.
That's my favorite book.
Even like Max Weber and his analysis of like the structures of society and all that, like just read a book.
Yeah. I think that might be a good episode for us. Maybe it's like a 30-minute episode, like talk about like things I don't know. This might be too pretentious actually now that I think of it, but like talk about like books we really like, and because we always talked about doing a Neon Genesis Evangelion episode.
Yeah, no, I think in the future, let us know in the comments, but we'd be willing to talk about books, movies, TV shows, media that we enjoy and brought us to this point.
Yeah, and if we can do an in-depth discussion of its politics too, but if that's too pretentious and that makes us sound like too stupid, let us know that too. It's okay to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, Sam, we all know that Sam's actually a himbo, so.
I just finished Dune, and all I want to talk about is, we need to make our podcast listeners our Fatakin.
I'm going to be honest, it's been 6-7 years since I've read Dune. I have no idea what you're talking about.
They were Paul's death commandos, like his like bodyguards that like waged jihad in his name. It's so awesome. It's so cool.
Yeah, Dune is every poli-sci major's favorite sci-fi book. I mean, let's face it. Like, there's something for everyone in Dune. It's like the proto Game of Thrones, except well written and with literary merit. if you haven't already, I highly recommend reading Dune, especially now that there's the movie coming out this year. So to
That's
all
why
of
I
you in
read
our
it.
audience that have not read it, read Dune. It's a good time. It may take you a while. It's a long book, but it's a
It's
good
a
one.
long book, but it starts out very fast paced and is a very easy read
Hmm.
in the beginning, at least.
Yeah, and I think that's all for this week. What do you think, Sam?
Sure. Yeah, that was just about an hour. I think as a good time to end it. And as we're always looking for episode ideas, so we're on YouTube now, so you can comment on it and tell us what you think. And I'd like to give a special shout out to my friend Yaya, who gave us our first review on Apple Podcasts. That was very nice, and it made me feel better about myself. And because let's face it, we have less than 50 followers on Twitter. Sometimes I ask myself, like, well, should we really be doing this? Is this a good way to spend our time? But when I see reviews like that, I'm like, oh, it doesn't matter if this podcast never makes me a billionaire. I want to I want to keep doing it because people I care about listen to it, and that makes me feel very good about myself.
No,
So
absolutely. Yeah, comment, like, give us positive reinforcement. Tell us we're doing a good job. We appreciate it and makes us feel good. That's all for this week. Thanks, folks.
happy holidays.